Chris. How you doing?
I'm all right.
There we are, finally, man.
Yeah.
It has been a long time since we spoke.
It has been. It's taken a long time to get this together. On both our parts, but on mine particularly. But
how are you feeling?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Back with the living.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you first discovered E. Cummings via The Grasshopper.
Well, when I think I was 14, and at that time I was living in Mexico, and I think there were 3 books in English in the school library. One of them I know was the Paul Graves anthology. The other, I can't remember, probably Kipling. And the third was, for some reason, the 1938 collected poems of Cummings. And I had never heard of him. I didn't, but it was in English, and I could read English, and I was interested in it. So I pulled it off the shelf, and first poem I came to was one of the dirty ones, May I Feel, Said He. And
that is one of my favorite poems by him. It's so witty, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
And can you imagine publishing that at that time,
No, I know. I mean, that was it.
Wow.
There actually is an entire manuscript of Cummings' erotic poems that were never published.
That were never published, really?
Yeah. It's still sitting at Harvard Library.
Wow.
Lawrence Ferlinghetti and I talked about publishing it at one point, and then it kind of dropped off the map, and there were complications with trying to get the permissions, because Norton felt that they owned everything at Cummings, and they were going to do it themselves. Lawrence finally just said he didn't want to bother with it anymore. Too much. But it's sitting there, and it's far more explicit than any of the things he did publish. But anyway, so I read a few of those, and then, suddenly, I'm sort of taken with the entire Cummings position there. It's like he's talking to me. I'm 14. And like, wow, and then I get to...
Only a good writer could do that, make you feel that intimacy, right?
And then I get to Republika Saga, and I'm going, what the hell is this? Republika Saga. I keep reading it, and then finally you get to the end, and it says Grasshopper. And I can still remember that great sense of denouement when I'm looking at the thing and going, this is a grasshopper hopping across the page. Oh my God. It was just a pretty extraordinary find. It was like one of those great eureka moments. And so that's how it all began. And then, of course, I sat down and read Cummings more seriously.
Only he could have come up with a poem like that at that time.
Exactly, yeah.
One of your favorite works by him is A Leaf Falls. Tell me why, and how would you recite such a piece which relies so heavily on the visual impact of the placement of letters on the page?
Well, Cummings basically, from very early on, was interested in writing poems for both the eye and the ear. And that's a poem for the eye in many ways. I would read it basically the way you take out the parentheses, and I would just read it, a leaf falls, loneliness. That's what the poem
Through
is.
pausing.
Just pausing between the letters so that the leaf can actually cascade down the page, which is, of course, exactly what happens in that poem. And the detachment from the branch, if you will, with the parentheses of the leaf falling through the air. It's just a little minor masterpiece, in my opinion. I mean, I love many of Cummings' poems, but I think that one also indicates a whole way in which Cummings could take the most simple, even trite image and make it new. extraordinarily good at doing that.
Particularly with revelation spurned by nature.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was really attached to the natural world.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Some have argued that free verse goes back to at least as far as John Wycliffe's translation of Psalms in the 1380s. And besides Walt Whitman, there were other Victorian-era poets who also experimented in free verse. There's also the vers libre tradition in French poetry and the innovation of Jules Lafargue in his Dernier Vers. We also find examples of what was later called concrete poetry in Greek Alexandria during the 2nd century BC. What did Cummings do to take all this a step further?
Great question. What Cummings basically did was realize that the line itself was somewhat tyrannical. In the sense that, there was even with some of the examples you cite, everything begins at the far left margin and moves across the page. Images themselves are within the poem, and while there's some sense of trying to break it open, there's very little attempt to play with the typography itself. What happens for Cummings is he didn't know about Apollinaire's calligram yet, but he did know when he first was starting to write poetry. He did know he had read Ezra Pound's poem *The Return*, which Pound published in 1912, and when that hit Cummings, it hit him hard. I mean, it's absolutely an incredible poem in and of itself, but there you have suddenly the breaking up of the lines, and there is still the remnants of vers libre in there, but all of a sudden the way the words themselves are arranged on the page actually mirror the moments within that particular poem. It's a very mysterious poem. I think it's essentially about poetry, but he suddenly gets this idea of, wow, look, if I just space in 5 spaces over from the left, look what happens to the line. And he begins really to play with that whole idea, and from just about 1915. And from then on, he is a committed poet of both time and space. I mean, you have to realize one of the things that Cummings was exceedingly aware of is the way something sounds. His whole idea of music for the ear, those pauses matter, those spaces matter. You're supposed to stop for a moment and then go on. That's the way he read them, that's the way he thought of them. But also as a painter, Cummings is incredibly aware of the visual display of something on a page. And so that's part of what he's after at that particular early juncture in his life when he's, just spring, his first major poem, if you will, has got that spacing in order to try to convey a sense of motion and movement and stopping and the puddle and all the rest of it, So
just amazing. And so much of what we take for granted today in poetry was first explored by him,
Absolutely.
And I understand he was the first to use the ampersand in a poem as well.
As far as I can tell, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Although Apollinaire does it too. But in English, yes, Cummings is it.
It's funny you brought that up. I wasn't going to mention Apollinaire, but when I first read your book, I kept scratching my head and saying, but what about Apollinaire? Wasn't he doing a lot of this at the same time? But then the other day I read in Kennedy's biography that, although that was true, that Cummings had no contact with Apollinaire, which is why he didn't explore that parallel.
Yeah. I mean, he does later on, of course, become aware of Apollinaire by the time he gets to France. Because Apollinaire is everywhere in the air at that point in France right after the war. He is the avant-garde poet, and everybody's looking toward him.
Absolutely.
And the people that Cummings began to know at that time were paying attention to Apollinaire. But it was actually, Cummings had already started off on his own trajectory. And Apollinaire simply, I think, reinforced what he was thinking and trying to do at the time.
That's so interesting. Well, while they were serving in the ambulance corps in France in 1917, Cummings and his pal William Brown ended up in a detention center at La Ferté-Macé for being a bit too indiscreet in their assessment of the war effort in letters that they wrote to their families and friends. You convincingly argue that Cummings crafted a still underappreciated prose masterpiece called The Enormous Room, which chronicles his incarceration there from September 22nd to December 19th, and which was published in 1922. Why do you so admire this work? And perhaps you can explain how it's based upon a three-part musical structure.
All right, where to begin with that one? I think it's one of the great books of all time. It's certainly a World War I novel, and in the best spirit of World War I novels, has very little to do with the war itself.
As you say in your biography, and I love this, it's a war book without a gun going off.
That's right.
It's just amazing, you know.
Yeah, it's and of course it's an autobiography. It's not a novel. It really is his. It's his first published book. It's his first foray into major literary prominence, and he essentially manages to tell a story that of his own imprisonment, but without focusing on himself as the main character. It's an extraordinary feat to pull off an autobiography where you, in fact, are not the protagonist. There is no protagonist. The protagonist is the room in that book. The protagonists are the people that are incarcerated there, most of them simply because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're foreigners. They're people who said something or other that the French authorities decided was seditious. Undoubtedly there were some German sympathizers there. Undoubtedly there were perhaps even some spies there. But you would never know it from Cummings. And so what he manages to do in that book is create a record of what it means to be human in adverse circumstances. And he does it in a prose style that is absolutely remarkable. He captures the speech of the individuals. He writes it in a vernacular. He has no problem with throwing French right alongside English and not translating it. He is lyrical. The images are those of a poet, and yet the actual book is this extraordinary testimony to what is involved with retaining your humanity in the face of very adverse circumstance. And the portraits he paints of the people in that particular detention center are real, unflinching, and yet there's also they're noble. They have a nobility about them. It's to some degree, Cummings being the son of a minister and having a good education at Harvard, was well aware of Christian allegory. And while he was not a particularly good Christian at that time, nor ever, but he'd already begun to distance himself from the church. But the remnants of Pilgrim's Progress and of the allegorical narratives that are so common in Christian literature are very much a part of that book. And so what he does is he creates a modern-day Pilgrim's Progress. Although now it's almost 100 years old, it's kind of hard to say modern day, but at his time, a modern-day Pilgrim's Progress. He has, the delectable mountains being four of the outstanding inmates there. The Monsieur le Directeur is named for Bunyan's beast, Apollyon. He talks about himself as a pilgrim. It's all very fun, very humorous at times, and yet there's a very deep story. And I think that's what, it's just the total effect of that book, which I read, I guess, in the late 60s.
Interesting time to read it.
And yeah, absolutely. And it was amazing in the sense that it absolutely hit me as being one of the great important books. It was an anti-war book, for sure. I was anti-war, so it fit perfectly well with that. But it also absolutely knocked me out because this was a style that I hadn't ever read before. I was pretty naive. I was pretty young. Later on, I discovered all sorts of other writers that did fabulous things with language. But the rhythms in that book are absolutely amazing. And the way in which he presents these portraits, these scenes of life, absolutely stirred me because I never read anybody who talked about the way life went on in quite that way. There was a realism there, but at the same time, he's totally influenced by the Romantics. He's influenced by the symbolists, and there's a whole way of describing the world it's an impressionist painting in many ways.
The play with language, the stylistic innovation is just absolutely unique and so far ahead of its time, huh?
Yeah, it is, and I think it's totally underappreciated. And I think it's one of the great World War I novels, but I think it's just one of the great, great world. I should know. You just said novel, which it is not. It reads like a novel. It's really an autobiography. Yeah.
And apparently Ernest Hemingway also called it one of the great books.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
A hard man to please.
A very hard man to please. Yeah. A very critical man to please.
Have you a favorite character from The Enormous Room?
Oh, my God. It's hard. I think Jean Lenègre is probably my favorite.
The Mecca of all female eyes.
Yes. I love him. I love his quiet beauty, his serenity. For Cummings, he's a kind of saint. He really does a enormous portrayal of him in that book, so that he becomes this almost otherworldly character who is somehow here on this earth, and hard to know exactly what he is, what he's in there for. We have no idea, and that's one of the great things about that book. We have absolutely no idea why anybody is imprisoned in there,
or why any of this is going on.
Except for C and B,
right?
Cummings and Brown.
Right.
They're the only ones that we have a backstory to.
He's certainly the warmest character, and it's the most engaging chapter, I feel, in the book.
Yeah, me too.
Jean Lenègre. He flies so beautifully in the face of all that hyper-rational French Cartesianism that's practiced by the jailers,
Yeah, absolutely.
And he remains at one with his emotions and his instinctive self, no matter what. He's, I think, also a personification of Cummings' own notion that we must unlearn everything and attack reality in a pure state of isness, unfettered by intellect and so overflowing with imagination. He says he was never perfectly happy unless exercising his inexhaustible imagination.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I love Jean Lenègre. There's some wonderful characters in that book. C and B are pretty wonderful in their own regard. Monsieur Auguste all these folks are just kind of extraordinary.
In his work, it's quite rare that Cummings unleashes any kind of bold, roaring, untamed emotion. But about halfway through the book, on page 117, he becomes so enraged at the despicable Monsieur le Directeur that he says, "Never in my life before have I wanted to kill, to thoroughly extinguish, and to entirely murder. Perhaps one day, unto God I hope so." A really beautiful outburst, which for me anchors the book with a very necessary bit of spleen.
Yeah.
Because he can be a bit detached and cerebral, Cummings, no?
Oh, absolutely. And when they're first incarcerated there, I mean, Brown's this is the greatest place on earth, and Cummings says, "Oh yeah, it's the most wonderful place on earth." And
I think Cummings says the stink was sublime.
Yes, exactly. And yet the conditions there are rough.
Oh,
They're
absolutely.
tough. I mean,
buckets filled with urine and feces instead of toilets and so on.
Yeah, and the food is minimal. It's exercise is minimal. The room is dark because the windows have been boarded up. I mean, this is no paradise by any.
And they both get a bit. His friend gets Cummings gets a bit ill, but his friend develops scurvy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a serious condition, and the director is your typical Nazi.
Absolutely.
And
of which there were many in France at that time.
There were many in France at that time. And they continued on for a good long
to this day.
Yes, I was going to say there.
Oh la la.
But yeah, absolutely. Cummings is an honest guy. Always.
Very honest, yeah.
Always.
His honesty got him locked up there, in fact,
That's right?
right?
That's
for
exactly
saying that he didn't hate the Germans, but he loved the French.
That's right, exactly. And so there's the whole conundrum.
Right.
And so, and this is why I say it's an autobiography without being autobiographical. But when Cummings says that, yes, I mean, you know that's a true emotion, and suddenly you say, yes, he is human. This is not he's not attempting to be the saint of, the prison camp.
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, I bring it up in a sense of admiration, and also just in terms of technically analyzing the book, I felt that it gave it an anchor.
Yeah,
emotional anchor.
Very perceptive.
How would you compare The Enormous Room to some of the other great war novels that you discuss in your biography?
Well, it's unique. It's certainly, it is a war novel without being a war novel. But then so are a whole lot of other ones. Three Soldiers, to some degree, Dos Passos, Three Soldiers, is, there's very little of the war in that book. There's far more in, say, All Quiet on the Western Front, or even Farewell to Arms, although I personally think Farewell to Arms is a love story, first and foremost.
Yeah, these other books, it's true, it's not so much portraits of the battlefield, but the after effect of being engaged in war.
Exactly, yeah. And I think Remarque's book still holds as one of the true masterpieces of war literature.
No, I'm glad to hear you say that, because rereading it for the first time recently, since I was about 16, I was really impressed by the power of this book.
It's I think it's also I may not be right about this because I've never done any real study, but it's also one of the first books to sort of get at PTSD. When Paul goes home, when he's on leave, he goes home. And it's been a while since I've read the book, so I may be mixing things up. But he goes home and he can't talk to his father.
No, you're right. He's completely psychically alienated and really destroyed.
Yeah.
And he's no longer the human being he was before.
Right.
It's terribly, and of course, the really tragic moment for me in that book is the description when he goes home and he looks in his old glass bureau, and it's the butterfly collection.
Yeah.
Symbolizing the innocence that he once had, and then either before or after that, this description on the battlefield of this butterfly that's hovering there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what a powerful metaphor.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's extraordinary. He no longer is interested in any of the things he was interested in before. And it's an extraordinary chronicle in the middle of this book of what war really does to one. I think Robert Graves' Goodbye to All That is the only other one that completely deals with that notion of what happened to people, which I also think is a masterpiece of autobiography about World War I. But World War I was did some great things for literature.
Absolutely. I mean, in these, Hemingway, as you said, Hemingway, A Farewell to Arms, Dos Passos, Three Soldiers, Remarque, All Quiet, and then, of course, there's also the enormous room in Celine's Journey to the End of the Night.
Yeah.
But, in the first three of those novels, they're terribly dark, tragic books, really haunting, despairing. And in their desire to achieve a certain goal, the protagonists have largely severed themselves, as you say, from society.
Yeah.
And they're subsequently destroyed. On the other hand, with Journey and the Enormous Room, besides portraying such horrific events, we also find a great deal of black humor and tragic comedy. And all of it portrayed with an abundance of literary innovation. Do you feel that Cummings and Celine share those things in common?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Voyage is, clearly one of the great books of all time.
Absolutely, one of the craziest books of all time, too. I think, right?
And he just gets crazier as it goes on.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, but there are parallels actually between them.
What did Cummings think of Celine, and is there any evidence that
don't know
he was aware of that Celine was aware of Cummings?
Celine was aware of Cummings. Whether Cummings was aware of Celine, I don't know, because I've never found any reference anywhere when I was looking through all that stuff to Celine. I would have seized on it, because I found that interesting. They shared a lot in common. I mean, they were both stylistic innovators. Voyage is, one of the most profound books that anybody wrote anywhere. But there are some major, there is a lot of black humor, but there's also a huge difference between the two. And I think what would have put Cummings off about Celine is that Cummings, for all of his Harvard snobbery, loved human beings.
Excellent point.
And basically, Celine hated human beings.
He was really verging on sociopathy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that becomes more apparent as time goes on. I wish I had the author's name in front of me, but I read a really excellent biography on him, and there's not too many good ones on him a few years ago. And apparently he was much more involved than anyone realized in, what would you call them, right-wing anti-Semitic groups that had formally organized during the 30s and so forth. It wasn't just off the top of his head that he was talking like that.
Yeah. No, not at all. I mean, he was, Celine was complex.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think your point is excellent, though, that the lack of humanity is really the huge difference between them.
Yeah. What they would have shared was the notion, I mean, what keeps coming through in Voyage au bout de la nuit is that sense of war itself being, what he continually uses the term maladie and cauchemar, and, he's always, talking about this as this kind of illness. War is an illness, war is a nightmare. It's, and he's always seizing on that as part of what that book's about. That's part of the journey into the night, And so, but...
off the top of my head, another interesting similarity between not so much Voyage à bout de la nuit, but between Celine's Castle to Castle and North.
Yeah.
And The Enormous Room is they're both stuck in a hellish room, which is another interesting connection. No.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I know that Celine was aware of Cummings because he was very aware of North American literature. He read, and he knew English to some degree. Cummings was widely translated into French, and he would have sympathized because Cummings himself was an anti-Semite.
Well, that's true too. That's another similarity.
When the big blow-up happened with Cummings as being sort of outed as an anti-Semite, you could be sure Celine took notice.
Huge difference in their anti-Semitism, though, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, Celine was he was filled with authentic, visceral hatred.
Oh, no, he was outrageous. I mean, if you read his Bagatelle, they're just vile. And you can't imagine how, this, one of the great prose stylists of French literature could also hold such abhorrent views. It's just hard to put.
Well, they say Shakespeare was an anti-Semite, but that doesn't mean we have to stop reading Shakespeare.
No, and of course we haven't stopped reading. Celine.
Whereas I think with Cummings, it was he had a big mouth and shot it off without thinking quite often. But when confronted with authentic anti-Semitism, even he was taken aback. For example, with Ezra Pound, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
He called Ezra Pound an anti-Semite.
Right. As much as he and Pound shared all sorts of views.
Right. But I think that tells us something about Cummings, no? That he was shocked by.
Yeah, it tells a lot, and and once you have to remember that anti-Semitism was basically.
It was the norm back then.
It was the norm, and it was particularly the norm among a certain WASP intellectual group. I mean,
as was the norm to be anti-Irish, anti-Italian, anti-everything else.
Yeah,
so
Harvard didn't
it
let
wasn't
in
a thing in itself.
Those folks. They didn't let them in. And that it cemented the notion that somehow they were inferior and the Harvard boys were superior.
Top dogs, yeah.
Exactly. And that kind of, it's very much a part of the story.
Yeah. Other prisoners at La Ferté-Macé were complete innocents who were being punished simply for, as you say, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for being foreigners who happened to be passing through France during a period of extreme xenophobia and spy mania. When I first read your biography, America had suspended habeas corpus, and we were holding innocent prisoners in the equally, or actually more dreadful, Guantanamo Bay detention facility, often for years, even after they were declared not guilty. And now, as a result of terrorism in Paris, dozens of French citizens are being arrested for indiscreet remarks they've posted online. Does The Enormous Room present us with a fitting contemporary parable about the dangers of losing free speech?
Well, absolutely. And, that's one of Cummings' major issues with everybody and everywhere was the desire to suppress people's emotions, people's feelings, people's words. Cummings took the First Amendment seriously. He truly believed that free speech should be free speech. He gets into La Ferté-Macé because essentially he has written some letters. Brown's the one who's mainly written them, but Cummings has written as well a couple of things. And he refuses to back down on his right to think what he wants to think. This is what, later on, it's what absolutely terrified him about what was going on in the Soviet Union under Stalin. That exact same thing. But, yeah, I mean, the parallel is there. If Cummings were around today, he would be signing petitions, leading marches, writing out about what's going on in Guantanamo. Because it's exactly the same situation for many of those prisoners there as it was for C and B and Jean Lenègre and who knows how many others who were simply happened to be, on the ground in Afghanistan when the special forces could go in and pick anybody up. And if they were on the ground, they must therefore be evil doers out to overthrow the United States.
Yeah.
And so, there's certainly that. And France itself, has never had a tremendous regard for free speech. They've locked people up for a very, very long time for speaking their minds. I mean, I love France, and certainly they have no issue with erotic literature, explicit literature, but politics has always been something that you could get in trouble for in France very quickly. And, the recent roundups of all sorts of folks in France, because they had something on their Facebook page, or because they said something perhaps pro-Muslim. Therefore, they must be a terrorist. Parallels very much what happened here. It's the paranoia that overtakes state governments when you have a perceived or real, as in this case with the Charlie Hebdo business. I mean, a real, an awful, terrible situation. Murdering Jews in a kosher grocery store strikes terror in a whole population. And, you understand, why they're going house to house picking up people. You understand why we had NSA, or have NSA, listening in on our conversations, including probably this one. But it doesn't necessarily... It wouldn't have set well with Cummings, and it doesn't necessarily justify the action itself that's been taken. So, I think the enormous room could be read right now and by those prisoners in Guantanamo or anybody looking at Guantanamo, and you'd go, wow. But there was no waterboarding at La Ferté-Macé.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Chris. That is an excellent point, and may the Bush-Cheney people rot in hell forever for that.
Yeah, right.
You hear that, NSA?
Yep, may they ever.
May they ever. Besides the hell of La Ferté-Macé, Estlin also experienced what he called the miracle of Paris. How did the City of Light help to shape and inspire him?
Oh, well, he was there at absolutely the moment when modernism broke out.
When what broke out, Chris?
Modernism.
Oh, modernism.
Yeah.
Well, the lucky boy attended
That's what I mean.
the premiere parade. I mean,
that's right. That's
Jesus
what I mean.
Christ, what luck is that, huh? Yeah.
Basically, you don't need to go any farther.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yes. But, obviously, you gotta kind of remember where young Estlin came from. I mean, he'd grown up in Cambridge in a very nice, well-appointed, large house. It would be regarded as a mansion by today's standards. In fact, now it's, I think, 4 different condos in that same house. He was privileged. He went to Harvard. He had religion on a weekly basis. He had the kind of tightness of that Harvard-Cambridge society that, omitted most of reality in favor of a kind of controlled notion of how young men, because it was all young men there, should behave and should live. His big experiences were crossing the bridge over to Boston to go to a couple of seedier places. And so suddenly he gets to Paris, right? And not only is there an explosion of art, literature, music, I mean, modernism is just in absolute full swing in terms of art and everything that's happening in Paris. Paris itself is glorious. There are abundant places to wander as a young man, get lost, get yourself in a little bit of trouble. He immediately hooks up with a couple of prostitutes, and my God, this is so exciting, you know. Life is suddenly possible. He knows French, which is a huge advantage, and he's absolutely overwhelmed by everything he sees. I mean, Cambridge is a nice, neat, drab little community. Paris is this absolutely gorgeous, sprawling, extraordinary, vibrant place. And so he is absolutely overwhelmed. He's studied French. He's read French writers. He's gotten a real sense, of, how suddenly you might live, and he never quite gets over it.
That's a very fitting way to end that statement. Yeah. Who among us does ever get over Paris?
Well, you never get over Paris. Let's just face it. You never get over Paris.
No.
Talking to the converted.
Absolutely. Well, in relationship to this as well, some of the things you just said, one thing that remains quite striking in his biography is the amazingly precious artistic education that he received, even when he was still just a little boy at home, largely at the hands of his mother, Rebecca. And I understand that Estlund's Uncle George was also a great influence on his creative and literary development.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this boy was absolutely a star from the moment he was born, at least in his mother's eyes. She encouraged him to do anything that he possibly wanted to do. She kept, which is wonderful from biographers, but she kept every little scrap of paper that he drew a doodle on. She kept his little notebooks. She kept his writings. He was enormously precocious.
And some of those precocious poems are not bad.
They are not bad at all. 7-year-old poems are pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And he could already draw incredibly well.
Right.
So yeah, there's an awful lot to that, So he was.
He had a golden childhood.
Absolutely a golden childhood. I mean, he was pampered. He was continually told how wonderful he was. He was continually told by his mother, particularly, that he could be anything he wanted to be, and everything he did was precious and wonderful. As a result, he became quite egotistical and remained so the rest of his life. But
never lost his creative spirit. Something like Alexander being told that he was fathered by Jupiter.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's essentially what he was told.
Yeah.
And Uncle George also was tremendous.
And George was a poet, apparently.
He was a poet, yeah. And he was always giving Cummings books that were above his head for him to read. And, of course, Cummings read them. And he was always encouraging him to write, to think, to read, to go beyond where he was supposed to be at that particular stage in his life.
The first time I read your wonderful biography, I was struck by how supportive Cummings' father was. After all, he even paid Estlund to write The Enormous Room.
Right.
But the second time, and I was very thrown off by that. I was thinking, but I thought artists were always supposed to have a contentious relationship with their fathers. But the second time I read it, I was eventually impressed by how controlling he actually was. How did Mr. Cummings help to mold his son, for better or worse, as a man and as a poet, do you think?
Well, it's a complex business. Both Mom and Dad were enormously supportive of young Estlund. I think that his mother was just a kind of, from every portrait you get of her, particularly from Cummings, but also from Cummings' sister. I mean, she is just this woman who is absolutely unconditional love all the time. Just full of it, and no matter what the children want, she will make sure they have. Cummings' father's a more severe man, in the sense that he is he's certainly a patriarch. He runs a house. He is a highly respected member of the Cambridge-Boston community. He's authoritative only in the sense that he is extremely concerned that young Estlin pay attention to certain codes of conduct, right morality, right living. His father's a minister. He was also a Harvard professor at one point. But he also is consistently attempting to remind Cummings of what he should or should not be doing. And so in that sense, he is controlling. And yet, he pays for Harvard. He pays for him to write his French notes up into enormous room. He pays for the typist. He supports his son's literary endeavors in a way that in this day and age would be pretty much unthinkable. Where you get very little support from your parents unless you want to go to business school or something.
Yeah. Right.
But there was a great belief that Cummings was going to be a great writer, great artist, whatever. His father didn't quite understand what his painting was about, but he understood the literature. He understood the writing, and when he read The Enormous Room, his father, by the way, was extremely literate, well-read, scholarly man. When he reads his French notes, as The Enormous Room was first called, he's absolutely overwhelmed.
He says, "Now I know that you are a great writer."
Yeah, that's what he tells him.
What a wonderful thing to hear from your father.
Yeah, so there is that double kind of thing. I think for Cummings, his father, though, represented also an impossible being. He didn't worry about trying to be like his mother because, A, she was a woman, B, she was his mother. But young men frequently are in the shadows of their fathers. And here's this man who is basically known by one and all. You walk down the street in Cambridge and everyone doffs their hats to Reverend Cummings. He is absolutely upright, moral, has the courage of his convictions, strong, tall, all of those kinds of things. And here's Cummings, who is not particularly tall. He's about 5'7". He's not particularly strong. He's not so interested in being an upright member of society. And there's the shadow, And yet, he loves his father, and his father certainly loved his son. But he realizes fairly early on, I would say in late adolescence, that he'll never be his father. And he won't, and yet he continually wants to please his father, as he does his mother, but he knows no matter what he does, he'll please his mother. She'll understand somehow.
It's a win-win with his mother.
Exactly, yeah.
His father was a preacher, and of course, it's impossible to live in the shadow of a saint. Perhaps for Estlin to carve out a sense of identity, rebelling and assuming the opposing stance and becoming a sinner was simply a logical conclusion. Also, the son was a product of the jazz age of the Roaring Twenties. How did the latter affect Estlin's personal transformation?
Well, I think it really begins. I think it begins to some degree in the Harvard classroom, and it's an odd place.
In other words, even before he moved out of the home, just being in the classroom. around his peers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe so. Because what happens is he's suddenly exposed to a world of ideas that he'd never known about. Mm. He's also exposed to an awful lot of great minds and intellectuals. But it's not the teachers that are all that important for Cummings. It's his peers. And by the time he joins the Harvard Monthly, which is the literary magazine there at Harvard, meets up with people like Schofield Thayer, John Dos Passos, Foster Damon, there's a whole group of them. Suddenly, they're thinking big. They've been to Europe. They've already been thinking about how art should be made, how literature should be written. They're aware of the latest currents in everything from the cinema to music to poetry to the novel to art. So suddenly Cummings is swept up in this. And there's a desire on his part to break with the stodginess, with the, truly Victorian mentality that, and it's not necessarily a bad one, but it's still very much a Victorian mentality that possesses his father and his father's peers and Cambridge society in general. It's hard to realize at this point how extremely stratified Cambridge society was, and particularly where Cummings lived. I mean, it was basically a place where everyone is upper crust, white, and white being Anglo-Saxon Protestant, not Irish. The Irish lived on the other side. Certainly not Jewish, and certainly not Italian or any other ethnic group. I mean, and so suddenly here he is at Harvard with the same kind of kids, incidentally, with the exception of the Portuguese Dos Passos. But most of them are breaking out from where they had been. And so I think the rebellion begins with the classroom. He's beginning to read beyond, he finds...
beyond what Uncle George was giving him.
Way beyond, yeah. And, his friends are bringing him and this and that, and they're having these, all-night discussions. And, of course, there's drinking, which he had never been able to do at home because his father was part of the temperance society. So suddenly, it's a huge world, and you have to kill your father. It's just basically, no matter what, you got to do that in order to become your own person, even though you may end up being your father later on. At that moment in time, it's very important to overthrow your father, and I have to get too Freudian about it, but essentially...
Well, we don't even have to get Freudian. It's the sense of separating from what the parents represent, really, what we're talking about. And that's what he's really trying to do there. Yeah. And, of course, it's an extremely... and he had the courage to do that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, and the courage to do that, but it's also easier for him to do it than it would have been for his father.
Oh, yeah.
Because the currents at the time were moving in that direction.
Right.
Everything is about change.
The 20s was the 60s.
The 20s was the 60s. That's right. That's right. Yeah, it wasn't the aughts.
All of which brings to mind the story that Susan Cheever tells in her memoir, Home Before Dark. Hey, sweetie, hey. The whores in the old woman's house of detention on Greenwich Avenue would call through the barred windows when his tall, patrician figure appeared walking out of Patchen Place towards 6th. He knew them all by name. Isn't that lovely?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What a great little story that is.
Yeah, it is. It's one of my little favorite parts.
I love, by the way, that she ends that book with a short description of Patchen Place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really envious because I never got in. She did.
What do you mean you never got in? The gate was locked?
Oh, no, I got in there, but I never got into the house.
Oh, into the house. Yeah, right.
Apartment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she weaseled her way in.
Oh, that's something.
She wrote me that. I said, "Oh, Susan."
Yeah, that was a charming way to end the book, where she describes the family that's living there and so on.
Yeah, it's really quite wonderful.
Yeah. Well, it's a magical place, Patchen Place. It's almost like a timeless rue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Another product of the flapper age was Estlund's cherished partner, Marion Morehouse, who would have been 17 years old in 1920.
Right.
Edward Steichen, who photographed her possibly as early as 1924, according to copyright images I'm finding on the internet now, made her famous in Vogue, and considered Marion to be one of his favorite models. Quote, the greatest fashion model I ever photographed. Tell us about her relationship with Estlund and how they supported each other emotionally and artistically.
Okay. That story actually begins with two relationships before that.
Right.
You can't go to Marion without.
The poor man had a golden childhood, but what bad luck he had with the women he selected.
Women, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, the first woman that he falls in love with is Elaine Thayer, who's married to his friend Schofield Thayer, and Schofield, as we now know, and as I'm sure Cummings knew at the time, was, if not bi, gay, and
very much in the closet.
Very much in the closet. Rich, aesthete, but not particularly interested in his wife sexually. And Cummings falls head over heels with Elaine, with Schofield's wife. And Elaine herself is upper crust. Elaine is not the easiest person in the world to get along with, nor was, I think, Estlund himself. But basically, they have an affair. She gets pregnant with Cummings' child. Thayer, being Cummings' best friend, knows what's going on, but adopts the child, or allows the child to be born as his daughter. Eventually, Elaine and Thayer's divorce. Elaine actually marries Cummings, and it does not last very long. There are just too many differences between them. The daughter doesn't realize at the time that she's a child, that Cummings is her real father, not her stepfather. They part ways. Elaine goes off to Ireland, and Cummings is bereft. I mean, he absolutely is bereft that Elaine has fallen in love with someone else and left him after he was hoping that this was going to be the love of his life. For all of Cummings' sort of sexual identity as a poet, because he certainly has one, because of all the erotic poems, and being one of the first ones to write poems that were unabashedly about, not just about love, but about sex. Mm-hmm. People think, oh, he must have had 1 million women. Well, he didn't. He really had 3 principal women, and they were all enormously important to him. I mean, he was a very tender, very sentimental, and in that way, son of his father, old-fashioned man. So, he then hooks up with a woman named Ann Barton, who is a flapper and totally unfaithful from the moment they get together. This kills Cummings as well. And so he's absolutely, he loves women, he loves women as women. And I'll try to clarify what I mean by that. He enjoyed being in women's company. probably among his very, very closest friends was Hildegard Watson, who was married to his friend Sibley. I don't believe there was ever any sexual attraction on either's part, but he absolutely adored being in her company. He adored women. He enjoyed who they were. He enjoyed the way they smelled. He enjoyed the way they looked, the way they walked. And so suddenly, here in really a pretty tough period for Cummings, I mean, financially he's not doing well. He's, he never did well. I mean, his mother generally supported him most of his life. But here he is, a two-time loser, if you will, and suddenly here comes this angel out of the fog, Marion Morehouse. And she is young. She is unlike Elaine or Anne, really interested in being with Cummings.
And not a gold digger like Anne was.
Not a gold digger like Anne was, certainly. And so she's gorgeous. She is makes it pretty clear pretty early on that what she wants to do is take care of this great man. And wow, he's finally found the love of his life. I don't know if whoever knows what takes place in those kinds of circumstances.
Impossible to say.
Yeah. But clearly, there was a tremendous attraction. From the little bit that I could kind of glean, and I couldn't really write this because I didn't have enough evidence, but from the little bit that I could glean, he was attracted to her initially because she was so gorgeous. It was certainly a major physical attraction. And it took a while for him to, I think, let down his guard so that he would be able to see her in a larger way. He kept her at a distance initially. Wasn't quite sure what to do. What we have is hundreds of pages of writings about Elaine, maybe 100 pages or so writings about Anne. We have only maybe 20 pages of writing about Marion. Why? Because he doesn't have to exercise the demons. And what he's doing with writing about Elaine and about Anne is trying to exercise those demons, because he wrote everything down. He was compulsive about trying to think on paper. And you could see the guy pacing about the room, smoking endless cigarettes, and then writing something down on a piece of paper to try to help him analyze things. Once he meets Marion, that goes away. He writes about other things, but he's not obsessing about his relationship any longer. And that, in a way, tells you, how perfectly matched they were. What happened is they spent more and more time together was that she became much more of a gatekeeper for Cummings. Allen Ginsberg told me a story about going to try to. He'd gone to Cummings' house and knocked on the door, and no one had answered. And he'd written him a letter. He'd sent him a copy of Howl. He really wanted Cummings' approval. It was enormously important to him, for some reason.
Whose house did Ginsberg not knock on?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, that was it. He was, at that point in time, he was not.
What a schmoozer, huh?
Yeah. But he finally gets to Patchen Place again on another occasion. He knocks on the door, and Marion comes down the stairs and takes one look at him and says, "You go away and don't
really
come back."
And never come back?
Yeah. And he tries to explain who he is, and she was the gatekeeper. And that was very much a part of her function in later years, with Cummings' blessing, because he became much more of a curmudgeon as he got older.
Yeah.
And and I mean by older, 55. Man didn't live all that long. But there was she became much more of the one you had to get through. Her political views really, I believe, began to affect Cummings's.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think you say that in the book, do you? Or maybe
yeah,
you
do.
You do? I couldn't remember.
But I don't know.
But that makes so much sense.
I remember thinking it.
No, you may have. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but sometimes and also what was in the original manuscript and what ends up in the book are two different things.
Right.
There was a lot of editing, and lawyers took certain things out.
Oh, I see.
And so it may not be in there.
Interesting.
I haven't reread.
But I could somehow that just makes sense. That clicks from your description of both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, she was very much a right winger, and she would spend her time. At that time, Lindbergh was on the radio, and various other right wing isolationists, keep out of World War II folks, and she would get Cummings to listen to these broadcasts, because these were the ones that were telling the truth. And she absolutely hated Roosevelt. Hard to know why. She was hardly an aristocrat. She hardly had any money.
Right.
She certainly had no reason to be a Republican. But then, oh well.
It's often like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, the shadow.
Yeah.
In 1996, Richard Kennedy, Cummings' previous biographer, published an essay titled "The Elusive Marion Morehouse." Lamenting her evasions and obfuscations, he called her, quote, the principal obstacle in his attempt to recreate, quote, the story of E. Cummings' life.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can touch upon how some of the rumors that you heard about Marion's past dovetail with the information that I've recently unearthed thanks to Tony Ungaro's help and to the rapid expansion of genealogical data on the internet in the years since your book has come out.
Well, first of all, your information is staggering. A, the amount of information you were able to get. B, the depth, and also the light it throws on Marion to begin with. We didn't even know how old she was. I totally sympathize with Kennedy, because I read that before I started my book, and I'm thinking, I'll dig up this stuff. I had no more luck than Kennedy. The advantage I had is I had access to a lot more papers than Kennedy did, so I was able to find more information. But
I have a feeling the genealogical information on the internet was nowhere near as developed then as it is now, Chris. Yeah.
Not at all. There was. I'm klutz with the internet, but I actually did have did do a search and came up with nothing. I called city halls and tried to get documents, and without the right information, you couldn't get anything. And now suddenly it's all come to light. But what we do know at this point is that she was born in 1903, and although I think she always played fast and loose with how old she was, and I'm not even sure Cummings knew how old she was. I really am not certain of that.
That's such a fascinating question,
Yeah, she was the daughter of a vaudevillian, and who total working class guy, and essentially ended up in Connecticut as a fairly young woman. Probably went to I pretty much tracked down, and you've done a much better job of tracking down that she went to school at a place called St. Francis,
what?
Probably how she got to New York.
Right, that's what I think. Yeah.
Through school, and I think you're absolutely right in that sense. She's Anglo-Irish. She's absolutely stunningly gorgeous, and then suddenly she gets all these bit parts in theatrical productions. She's 19, 20 years old, and she's in, so many shows. I think you have her down for something like over 100 performances that she was in during.
Right. I just looked before we contacted each other today, and she was in, as far as I can see, 5 plays that we know the titles of, but some of those, as you say, went on for dozens, if not hundreds, of shows.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
and the playbills that you sent me were fascinating, showing her there with her sister, incidentally, who was also a performer, who actually performed even Lillian, who performed in far more plays. But I think that's probably how Steichen first discovered her.
That's my theory also, because it also dovetails with, the date of some of these internet images that are copyrighted as early as 1924. That would dovetail with the period that she's in these plays.
Yeah. So she's a model. She's in vogue. She's an artist model, Steichen. It's likely she also was very much trying to achieve more in the theater at about the time she meets Cummings, and then it's hard quite for me, and I still don't have and I wish I did. I had more of a sense of what those early days of their relationship was like. Because they were always together, they weren't writing letters.
Interesting.
He's not keeping much journal at that time about her. He complains about her, and that's about it occasionally. But they're like little bitchy complaints, And so, but suddenly she moves from sort of a career woman, because she certainly was building a career, to being Cummings's protector, supporter.
But were any of the rumors that you heard while you were researching the book that you couldn't, that you didn't put in the book because you didn't feel that you could back them up enough? Were any of those rumors, now knowing what we know about her, make more sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anything in particular?
Well,
or just the general impression that you had?
Yeah, I mean, we are pretty sure that she fabricated her early life, to Cummings as well as anyone else. Some of the accounts of her, for instance, there's some letters that went back and forth at the time between Edmund Wilson and various other people. Now, Wilson didn't like her. He felt that she was just after Cummings because he was famous, and he didn't trust her past. He didn't. So there was a sense of he felt something was shady, and he felt Cummings was just head over heels,
being taken in.
Yeah, not gonna, and that he felt that she would eventually do something against him. I think there was that spirit of things. But obviously she wasn't. She was actually devoted. There's no evidence she had affairs, during the time that she was with Cummings. I mean, she did have one affair, but everybody knew about it. So, but she was hardly running around on him, nor Cummings on her. I mean, he had a little affair as well with a student that he'd met at Bennington.
Right, not a typical part of his pattern.
Yeah,
but
they were very devoted to each other.
Yeah.
But the fact that she wanted to sort of just spring whole as Steichen's model and actress, and just did not ever want to admit anything about her past, even how old she was.
Right. Well, here's another interesting thing. As you know, I tracked her parents down to being remarried in the Bronx.
Right, which I had no idea even who her parents were. So this was like amazing.
Right.
They were married twice. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't have a record of the first marriage, but then again, in a sense, we do because they're in the census reports of the time they're called married. So we don't have the actual marriage certificate. Yeah. But then in 1918, thanks to Tony Ungaro's help, he said to me, "Oh yeah, they were married in 1918 again at this church." And then, of course, when I contacted the church, lo and behold, there's the certificate. I mean, I never would have found that thinking, who's going to be looking for a marriage certificate after all of these years when the children are already born, right?
Right.
But so this might be the first, clue that we have that they're in New York in 1918. Now, what's interesting is in 1924, and Marion would have been 15 then in 1918, right? So then in 1924, she opens in a play on 11th of October. She's playing in the Greenwich Village Theater on 7th Avenue South, near Christopher, a play called The Saint, and she has a minor part. And then, so that's 1924. That's the same year that Steichen, the earliest picture I find that's copyrighted 1924 by Steichen. So who knows? It's a possibility that might have actually been the play that Steichen spotted her in.
Could have been. Absolutely. And it would have made sense because it was right in the village.
Right.
And of course, Cummings was friendly with Steichen.
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
There's another piece of the puzzle. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
now this is purely speculative, but this is the hunch that I had that I wanted to share with you. Marion supposedly met Cummings backstage after a play she performed in.
Right.
But the Playbill archives, which lists 5 other plays in which she had minor parts, doesn't have any record of her acting at that time. Now, the source for this incident is Marion herself.
Right.
In an interview with Richard Kennedy, who later called her the elusive Marion Morehouse. Now, I find it highly suspicious that Marion never mentions the name of this play. And I think it's more likely that Marion, and again, this is speculative, but that Marion and Estlin met perhaps at a Ziegfeld Follies or some similar venue where she often worked as a showgirl. And of course, Cummings loved the burlesque and used it as a theme in his poetry, and even impersonated the dialogue of the showgirls in his work. What do you don't you think that's a possibility as well?
Oh yeah, I think that's probably much more likely. Oliver Cummings also loved the theater, and of course he'd written him for the theater.
Apparently she had trouble getting parts because of the tall, thin, statuesque figure, which made it perfect for Steichen because his whole thing was portraying the gown as a fine art image.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So interesting. The stark anti-war message of the Enormous Room and of those other novels we discussed provides another link between the 20s and 60s, as does Cummings' unconventional lifestyle. Yet as he aged, he grew more, as you say, far more politically conservative. Isn't it ironic that 2 of the greatest, rather the most celebrated authors of the 60s, Cummings and Kerouac, were both right of center, anti-democratic party, anti-Semites, and financially supported by their mothers all throughout their lives?
I know.
I mean, this is a ridiculous, silly question, but it just struck me,
No, it's a great question. And I hadn't even added it all up until you asked me that question. I mean, yes, of course. I mean, there's so many parallels. It's ridiculous.
It just struck me because these 2, I mean, people today don't realize this, but they were both icons in the 60s, weren't they?
Were
Literaries,
literary absolutely icons. Literary icons.
Yeah.
There are some differences, obviously. I mean, Cummings became increasingly right-wing, really because he had observed Russia or Soviet Union up front, close, personal, and He went to the Soviet Union as a lefty. He went through Aragon and El Triolet in Paris. Aragon, longtime member of the Communist Party, great friend of Cummings. He goes really because they help arrange for him to go as a writer into the Soviet Union. And what happens is he almost immediately sees that this is a police state. And he sees what Stalin has perpetrated. And he can't, he's totally stunned by it. He doesn't, for him, that's the crucial moment when he gives up on the left. And yet, just to characterize Cummings as a right-winger isn't quite right either. Because,
absolutely, yeah.
If anything, he's a libertarian.
Interesting.
In the sense that he believes in freedom of everything. But he's also fervently, by this point, anti-communist. Dos Passos, the same thing happens to him.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Dos Passos becomes a right-winger by the end of his life. And the same kind of conversion because of that, observance of what Stalin had done. For Dos Passos, it's really the later 30s that convinces him, when you're starting to round up the great writers, artists, and composers, and shooting them, that Dos Passos turns against the left, like initially against Stalin, and then that becomes against communism in general. Dos Passos thinks it through more than I think Cummings does. But for Cummings, it's definitely that particular moment. And then Marion certainly contributed to Cummings' anti-Semitism and to his notion of the right. Although, you have to remember that Cummings had no use for war. Cummings is one of the great anti-war poets ever in American literature.
Yeah, so it's very much a mixed bag. You can't put a label on Cummings.
And so, he doesn't want to go into World War II. I mean, there were many in America. You remember, the war starts in 1938. We don't get into it until Pearl Harbor gets bombed in 1941.
Right.
I mean, there was a pretty strong, this isn't our fight, going on in this country, and he was very much a part of it. But I think that, while he didn't want to have much to do with the left, he also he didn't have much to do with the right either. He defended McCarthy at one point, but that was stupid, and so did Kerouac. With Kerouac, I don't know. Burroughs told me that it was all Spengler's fault, but Burroughs often sort of
imagine things.
Yes, he certainly did that, but he also had he also liked to sort of I don't know, play jokes on.
He was mischievous.
He was mischievous, yes, and you ask a question as complex as why did Kerouac become a right winger? Well, I'll give you a silly answer.
I forget whose story it was, but there's some story where some celebrity or some known figure goes out to visit Burroughs on his ranch or whatever, and then Burroughs takes him, shooting with guns, and Burroughs hands him this pistol, and after they shoot, the man I think dropped it because the barrel was just so hot,
Yeah.
And he said to Burroughs, "Oh my God, I almost burnt my hand on that thing." And in that very dry intonation, Burroughs says, "Well, that's why I don't like to use that particular gun."
That's definitely Burroughs.
He was very much a trickster, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so he claims that it was all Spengler's fault that turned him into a right winger.
Well,
I don't think so.
I have a quirky theory about Kerouac. I mean, it's not a serious theory, but when you look back on it now, and we realize in retrospect that the FBI was opening enormous files on all these people that spoke out against the war and against the government and so on and so forth. Kerouac might have been a lot smarter than people thought he was for keeping his trap shut and hanging out with Bill Buckley.
Exactly.
They never bothered him, did they?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Whereas they were after Allen, they were after Ferlinghetti, they were after just about everybody else, Gary Snyder, certainly.
Right.
You know, that whole group was being hounded at that point.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there may have just been that. You know, I think part of it, too, is that, I mean, Kerouac, it's really complex, but I've heard a whole lot more about what people thought happened. Ginsberg, who was probably as close to Kerouac as anyone, you know, was somewhat mystified by that turn. But he felt it was because Jack had just become disillusioned with just about everything, and yet Ginsberg continually would affirm that essentially Jack had always been a sort of patriotic American that had never not been part of who he was. It was patriotic to get in an automobile made in Detroit and drive across the country.
Excellent point.
And see it and write about your own country. And you know, it's
and he also had a sort of, I mean, it was a sort of patriotism with a capital P that was almost like a Platonic ideal that you'd have to go back to Walt Whitman to find something similar like that, right? I mean, they held America as a kind of transcendental spiritual potentiality.
Oh yeah, and you know, and I think for Allen as well, he was a patriot in that same way, in the way that Whitman's a patriot.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think for Allen, he would love being in the same sentence with Whitman, but it also is very much the case that the two of them had that sense of loving this country. It doesn't mean you like everything it does. It means that you fight like hell to put it back on its course, or what you think at least should be the course. Whereas I think from what Burroughs told me, what Allen told me, and other people, it was essentially that as Jack grew older, he just became more disillusioned with everything. He became disillusioned with politics. He became disillusioned with writing. He became disillusioned with fame. The only thing he doesn't seem to have become disillusioned with is alcohol. And, you know, that continues until it kills him.
Well, he more or less comes out and says, as a Roman Catholic, I can't commit suicide, so I'm drinking myself to death instead.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's a wonderful point you bring up, though, is that Ginsberg, God bless him, who really put his ass on the line constantly to try to affect change in the country, he was really just as patriotic as Kerouac, yet they had a completely different definition of what America should be, right? Well, this is an interesting segue. One of the things, although he passed away in 1962, one of the things that endeared Cummings to the 60s generation was his quirky literary style, his disregard for authority, and his unbridled awe when thrust before the numinous dimension of life and the wonders of nature. What was it like to read Cummings in the 60s, and how did the beats take to his poetry?
Okay, well, for me, reading Cummings in the 60s was like reading somebody who was talking directly to me about what was going on. You know, I had friends who were being hauled away to prison for being anti-war. Had friends who were refusing to enlist, who decided they would go to jail rather as a protest, rather than enlist or leave the country because they loved their country. And you're suddenly reading those Cummings poems about war, and he's talking to you at that very moment in time. At least that's the way I felt about it. At one of the very first California moratoriums, which I think probably 68, maybe 67, something like that, against the war, I remember reading, I read Cummings as got up to the mic along with, everybody else. I read Cummings, and Cummings hit people in a way that all the rhetoric and everything that other people were doing. I didn't do anything, just read Cummings. I got to, I sing of Olaf, finish off with that. People burned their draft cards.
Ah, how beautiful.
You know, I mean, that was the power of the guy at that time. Everybody's backpack had a couple different books in it. It had Enormous Room, or his poems. It had On the Road. It had Coney Island of the Mind. It had Howl. Those were the backpacks.
The textbooks of the generation.
Yeah,
absolutely,
right.
absolutely.
And if we were lucky, a little Rambo, just for good measure. But and so, of course, Cummings sounded like a contemporary. I don't think any of us knew that he'd become a right-winger in his old age. We hadn't read any biographies. We didn't care.
Yeah.
We knew what he was talking about in those books. And we also knew what he was talking about when he was talking about love, sex. I mean, all of the stuff that he stood for was, in a sense, what the 60s was trying to emulate, trying to break outward. I remember Kenneth Rexroth, who actually liked Cummings quite a lot. Rexroth, describing him as that old bohemian dinosaur.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He said, now the dinosaur walks again. It was like, that was, it was Rexroth. But the beats were, Ginsberg was, he was important for Ginsberg because he was very willing to write about the way it was. For Gary Snyder, he mattered because he was the first environmentalist as a poet.
Oh, interesting.
In Snyder's view. I don't think he was, by any means. I think the Romantics were already way ahead of him. But for Snyder, Cummings hit him as an environmentalist. And, Bukowski, of course, wrote that wonderful poem, What I Liked About E. Cummings.
I don't know that.
What I liked about E. Cummings was that he cut away from the holiness of the word and with charm and gambol gave us lines that sliced through the dung. How it was needed, how we were withering away in the old tired manner. Of course, then came all the E. Cummings copyists. They copied him then, as the others had copied Keats, Shelley, Swinburne, Byron, et al. But there was only one E. Cummings, of course. One sun, one moon.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'm glad I never heard it before. I had the honor of hearing you recite it. That was really nice.
Yeah.
That was very nice. Cummings' poetry alternates between a detached, cerebral sort of satiric wit and an immediate, deep-felt celebration of the ultimate importance of love. Another vital 60s theme. In one poem, he writes, I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear. And whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little about the duality of his style.
Well, Cummings is actually a poet of many styles.
Good point.
There were, and you see in his notebooks, he'll dash off something. I personally think he actually published a little too much, but he was sentimental, and he didn't care. It was becoming old-fashioned already to be sentimental. I mean, certainly Eliot did his best to wreck that tradition. Stevens did his best to put cerebral poetry above all else, and it continued on down the line. Whereas Williams still was interested in body and soul and what was going on in front, and Williams and Cummings, incidentally, were good friends. But what you get there is this sort of lyrical, direct statement. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. Well, what's more trite than that? And yet, it all kind of works together because he's, you feel like he's telling you the truth. And the way it's laid out on the page, the spacing gets close together, the parentheses, the movement of the lines, the very rhythm of them. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. There's all that rhythm, all that you're playing with all the time. It's it's a melding of truly a master craftsman with this very simple, almost trite, sentimental statement.
But deeply authentic.
Yeah.
I thought that particular stanza was reminiscent of Whitman's opening line from The Leaves.
Well, yeah, there is certainly that.
But I shall assume, you shall assume, and so on.
Yeah.
What did he think of Whitman?
Well, we know he actually. All right. There's a page or two in the Harvard Archive where Cummings takes a poem from Leaves of Grass and rewrites it in his own typography.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was in the original manuscript reproduced that I had reproduced it, but somehow it got cut out by the editors at one point or another. Which doesn't matter anymore. But Whitman was interested in Whitman. He was really interested in what he was doing with breath, and the notion.
As were the Beats.
As were the Beats, exactly. And there's another parallel there. But at the same time, he's trying to read everybody, and he moves on from Whitman pretty quickly, as far as I can tell. By around 19, he discovers Whitman. This as far as we can tell, that those couple pages are from around 1915, 1914, something like that. By 1916, he's already embracing the new. In the sense he's looking at Pound, he's reading Couteau, he's reading Laforgue. He's definitely, Rimbaud, of course, has already come around, Baudelaire. He's read the Symbolists, he commits Verlaine to memory. So suddenly he's off on a whole other trajectory. That is more European, that is France. Eliot, of course, is huge for Cummings, even though, he and Eliot never particularly liked one another. But Eliot's huge for everybody, just because he was huge. I mean, Wasteland is not ignorable, nor is Prufrock. I mean, Cummings actually reviews Eliot's first book, and Cummings clearly didn't know how to write a review or write about poetry very well, and unfortunately he gave it up. But he clearly has an appreciation. He also reviewed Joyce's Ulysses, we know, which was rejected, his review, but he was reading, that's what he was reading at that point. So I think Whitman kind of drops out, but I believe Whitman never goes away, because what happens is by the time you get to the more mature Cummings, he's coming back to that kind of celebration of life, of liberty, of standing your own in your own space on Earth. And, the line, Cummings is always playing around with the way words lie on the page. But if you think about it, so was Whitman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, those lines matter the way they're written. And I don't think that he necessarily ever, except from those early experiments, and he was experimenting with everything at that time, but from those early experiments, I don't think that he, overtly was in debt to Whitman. But I think that, it's hard to be a poet in America without having Whitman standing over you.
Right. And with Whitman spending his entire life re-editing and changing and adding and subtracting to that poem, who could possibly have spent more time consideration over how the line appears on the page, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What do you carry in your heart from Cummings' work?
Oh boy!
and how do you apply it to your verse? How did you apply it to your verse as you came of age as a poet? Because obviously you read him at quite an early age.
Oh yeah. Well, what's interesting is that when I first read Cummings, what appealed to me were the easy poems. The poems like I Carry Your Heart, or My Father Moved from Dunes of Love, or If There Are Any Heavens, My Mother Will All by Herself Have One. Those May I Feel, Said He. Those the more accessible poems,
right?
The ones of the direct statement. And I have to say, there was probably a good 20 years went by between my reading Cummings and not reading Cummings again. I was on so many other trajectories. And then I have to totally credit Richard Kostelanetz for my rediscovery of Cummings. Richard Kostelanetz put out a book called Another E.E. Cummings. And
I think you mentioned this in your biography, yes.
Yeah. And I get the book, and because, thinking, first of all, Richard is always interesting. And secondly, what's he doing with Cummings? Wouldn't have put Kostelanetz and Cummings together. And then all of a sudden I'm putting Kostelanetz and Cummings together because Kostelanetz is suddenly educating me. And Richard is showing me this whole other dimension of Cummings that I really had missed.
How interesting.
Cummings as the master craftsman, but also as a poet who is really attempting to change the way poetry gets read and gets written. And that was a revelation to me, and actually I had great honor of doing a presentation with Richard on Cummings at one point, about his visual verbal pyrotechnics, and it was quite wonderful. But I think what I carry around now are, of course, all those poems. Plato told him. It just keeps coming back to me with these wars. So the anti-war poems are still very much alive in my memory, but also those extraordinary experiments with language and those leaps. And there was a reason that Gertrude Stein liked Cummings so much. She got that he was pushing language out. Stein's marvelous. Stein is doing stuff with the English language that nobody knew you could do. But Cummings was also doing it in his own quieter American way. And
his more introverted New England now.
His introverted New England way, yeah. And it's quite fascinating. So I think I carry that around quite a lot. And the whole notion of that it matters how words look on a page. It matters where you begin the line on a page. It matters how you enjamb a line. because it's going to change the whole effect if you're really paying attention. So I guess that's kind of the where Cummings comes across my radar screen these days. You know?
All right, my man. It was so good talking to you today, Chris. And,
well,
and thanks.
good talking to you. And thanks for doing this. And,
it's a pleasure.
Thanks for such great questions.
It's a pleasure, man.
And the great back and forth.
As always, you're getting me to read all kinds of stuff I would never ordinarily be reading. So your mentoring has not ceased. All right.
That's good.
All right. Thursday at 1.
Thursday at 1.
All right. Bye-bye for now.